You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with a quick look at the headlines we're tracking at the moment. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has admitted that Islamabad had violated an agreement with India back in 1999 in an apparent reference to the Kargil War. Mr. Sharif actually made the remarks in a meeting of the PMLN General Council that elected him president of the ruling party 6 years after he was disqualified by the country's Supreme Court. South Africans will vote in national and provincial elections to elect a new National Assembly and state legislatures. The National Assembly will choose the president for the next 5 years. The South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, faces the prospect of his ruling party's worst election result ever, yet he's still likely to be re-elected as leader of Africa's most advanced country. Defying an appeal from the International Court of Justice, Israeli tanks advanced to the heart of Rafah for the first time after a night of heavy bombardment, while Spain, Ireland and Norway officially recognized a Palestinian state, a move that further deepens Israel's international isolation. Hong Kong police have arrested 6 people, marking the first time that the city's new national security law, known as Article 23, has been used against suspects since it was implemented back in March. The US stock market is finally as fast as it was about 100 years ago. That was the last time share trades in New York settled in a single day, as they have under the new Securities and Exchange Commission rules. The change, halving the time it takes to complete every transaction, also occurred in jurisdictions including Canada and Mexico on Monday. Indian woman peacekeeper Major Radhika Sen, who served with the UN mission in Congo, will be honoured with the prestigious Military Gender Advocate Award by the UN Secretary General, marking the International Day of UN Peacekeepers. Well, a big focus. Former Pakistan Premier Nawaz Sharif has admitted that Islamabad had violated an agreement with India signed by him and ex-Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 1999 in an apparent reference to the Kargil intrusion by General Pervez Musharraf. The Kargil War this is the big explosive statement that he has made after a historic summit. Actually, Nawaz Sharif and Atal Bihari Vajpayee had signed the Lahore Declaration back in 1999 on the 21st of February to be precise. Now that agreement, it talked about a vision of peace and stability between the two countries. It signaled a breakthrough. Still a few months later, Pakistani intrusion in the Kargil district in Jammu and Kashmir actually led to the Kargil War. Starting in March 1999, Mr. Musharraf, who was the 4-star general of the Pakistan Army, ordered the secret infiltration of forces into the Kargil district in Ladakh, and a full-scale war erupted after New Delhi discovered the infiltration, and India won the war while Mr. Sharif was actually the Prime Minister. In fact, Nawaz Sharif also talked about how he was removed from the office of the Prime Minister back in 2017 by then Chief Justice of Pakistan, Saqib Nisar. He said all cases against him were false, while the cases against Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf founder leader Imran Khan were true. Listen in to Mr. Sharif's claims.
वाजपेयी साहब लाहौर तशरीफ लाए, याद है या नहीं याद है? याददाश्त कमजोर है ना आपकी? तो तशरीफ लाए और हमसे आके यहाँ पे मुआहदा किया. ये अलग बात है कि हमने मुआहदे की खिलाफ वर्जी की, उसमें हमारा कसूर है, उसमें हम कसूरवार हैं.
My colleague Mohammad Ghazali has been tracking the latest updates for us as Pakistan is concerned. Ghazali, now in an apparent reference to the Kargil War, the ex-Pakistan Prime Minister has said that it was his country's fault.
Yes, and it's a major admission by Pakistan's former Prime Minister, because he was involved in the Lahore Declaration, which was signed in Feb 1999, a couple of months before the Kargil War started. Now, why this is significant? Two reasons. One, that this statement has come at a time when the bilateral relations or relations with Pakistan has hit a new low after the Pulwama attack, and both the countries have downgraded their ties. But Pakistan's former Prime Minister, whose party is in power right now, if admitting openly that how they were the ones who sort of backstabbed India after the declaration, and how Mr. Nawaz Sharif goes on to say that perhaps he was not involved. And there have been many books written about Kargil War, and most of them suggest that perhaps Pervez Musharraf never took Nawaz Sharif in any sort of confidence before this Kargil intrusion took place, and then later it was a war with India. And it also shows that how, if you remember, Indian Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi in many interviews during these elections have hinted that perhaps he doesn't want to spend most attention towards Pakistan, or even the foreign policies as such. As we speak to many officials in India also suggest that perhaps Pakistan is of no interest, is what the Indian government's line is, that we are progressing towards a new era, and we don't need to waste our time towards Pakistan because Pakistan keeps stabbing. But this kind of a statement coming from Nawaz Sharif suggests two things. One, that they are at least acknowledging on a public forum that how they were the ones who backstabbed or kind of went back on their words after the Lahore declaration. And despite that, even it seems that due to their own internal turmoil in Pakistan, the leadership is still willing to mend their ways and to develop ties with India, or to at least improve ties with India.
Ms. Ghazali, thank you so much for joining us with the latest update and contextualizing the story for us. The other crucial story we're tracking: South Africans are voting in national elections in which the ruling African National Congress could lose its majority. Voting is taking place in South Africa, with the country's 27 million strong registered voters out to determine who will lead Africa's largest economy. Opinion polls show the ruling African National Congress having less than 50% support for the first time in 30 years. NDTV's Isaac Lucando reports from Johannesburg.
South Africans are voting across 23,000 polling stations in the country's 9 provinces today. More than 76,000 registered voters abroad have already cast their ballots on the 17th and 18th of May, and about 1.6 million voters with special needs, including pregnant women and people with disabilities, were allowed to vote over the last 2 days. 70 political parties have candidates in this election. The ruling ANC, Democratic Alliance, EFF and the newly formed MK are the prominent contenders. If the ANC doesn't secure an absolute majority in the 400-seat National Assembly, President Cyril Ramaphosa will need to negotiate support from other parties to stay in power. The ruling party's grip on power is threatened by long-standing complaints about economic inequality, corruption and electricity shortages. Over 5,000 election observers have been deployed across the country, with full results not expected until the 2nd of June. Isaac Lucando, NDTV, Johannesburg.
Switching tracks, Israel's military has denied striking a tent camp west of Rafah after Gaza health authorities said Israeli tank shelling had killed at least 21 people there. This is an area Israel has designated a civilian evacuation zone. But earlier, defying an appeal from the International Court of Justice, Israeli tanks advanced to the heart of Rafah for the first time after a night of heavy bombardment, while Spain, Ireland and Norway officially recognized a Palestinian state. Now that's a move that further deepens Israel's international isolation. Israel's closest ally, the United States, reiterated its opposition to a major Israeli ground offensive in Rafah, but said it did not believe such an operation was currently underway. In central Rafah, however, tanks and armored vehicles mounted with machine guns were spotted near the Al-Afda Mosque, which is a city landmark, and the Israeli military said its forces continued to operate in the Rafah area without commenting on reported advances as far as the city center is concerned. Meanwhile, global leaders continue to voice horror at the fire in a designated humanitarian zone of Rafah, where families uprooted by fighting elsewhere had sought shelter, and they urged the implementation of a world court order last week for a halt to Israel's Rafah invasion.
The Israeli government has to be replaced as soon as possible. This is totally inappropriate leadership to the people of Israel, to the state of Israel. Prime Minister has failed completely. Before the October tragic events and ever since the October events, the handling of the military operation was not right, and the present time continuing this operation does not serve any national interest that is worse for the state of Israel. We just have to stop it, and we have to try and deal with our domestic issues, which are very serious and threatening the foundations of our country, our status in the world. The international community attitude to the state of Israel is eroding on a minute basis, on a daily basis.
El Estado de Israel ha actuado siempre por encima del derecho y de la ley y siempre ha salido con la suya. Entonces es el momento de que sepa que es un Estado como cualquiera y como Estado como cualquiera tiene los mismos derechos y los mismos deberes y no puede seguir escapándose de las consecuencias de sus hechos.
But the United States does not believe Israel has launched a full-scale invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza. This is what White House spokesman John Kirby has said on record. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller has said Israel also has the obligation to do everything possible to minimize civilian harm as it carries out its operations. Listen in.
Like many of you, I'm sure, I watched the videos that emerged from the fire that broke out in the camp there this weekend. Those images were heartbreaking. As we have said before, Israel has a right to go after the Hamas terrorists responsible for the cold-blooded murder of civilians, as appears to have been Israel's aim here. And Hamas should stop hiding behind civilians in Gaza. But Israel also has the obligation to do everything possible to minimize civilian harm as it carries out its operations.
Well, in other news, Hong Kong made its first arrests under a new Beijing-inspired national security law to curb dissent. Now, the 6 suspects, including a prominent democracy activist who is already in a maximum security prison, are accused of advocating hatred against Hong Kong and China. The city's reputation as a global business hub has taken a hit over the political crackdown, as well as closer ties to the mainland. International companies are actually grappling with the transition, as per multiple reports, with lawyers and bankers fearing scrutiny for external interference. In fact, some firms are leaving Hong Kong altogether, and I must inform you that office vacancies hit a record high back in March. But listen to what the Hong Kong Secretary for Security had to say.
This morning, the National Security Department of Hong Kong Police Force arrested a total of 6 people, including 5 female and 1 male. One of the female is now being remanded in our correctional institution. The allegations, it's about this group of people is using a Facebook page in the social media to advocate hatreds against central government, Hong Kong government, and also our judiciary.
As always, news and updates continue in a moment. We're stepping into a very quick break. Welcome back. The US stock market is finally as fast as it was about 100 years ago. That was the last time share trades in New York settled in a single day, as they have under the new Securities and Exchange Commission rules. Now, the change, halving the time it takes to complete every transaction, also occurred in jurisdictions including Canada and Mexico on Monday. Here are the details for you.
Wall Street ushers in a new era of faster trade settlement. This essentially means trades will settle in one day for the first time in 100 years or a century now onwards. The US market regulators' move, or the move by the US Securities and Exchange Commission, is aimed at improving overall efficiency in the system. NDTV has been speaking to analysts, and they believe liquidity turnaround, or in a sense cash flows, will now be quicker. They also feel this process will ease margin trading and is a big leap in the trading ecosystem altogether on Wall Street. Experts welcome the US regulators' move to this platform of globality as they feel the era of digitalization will help square off positions much faster. Remember, back in the 1920s, it was impossible to keep up with surging trade activity due to the manual nature of transactions, and while the 1990s and 2017 did better to reflect the changes, the shift to transactions and trades being settled in a single day reflects the size and scale of the market today, as well as the advancement of technology to handle it.
Well, in other news from the United States, Donald Trump's historic hush money trial edged closer to its conclusion as the prosecution and defense made their closing arguments to the court. In the defense's final pitch, Mr. Trump's lead lawyer attacked Michael Cohen, his former fixer and the prosecution's star witness, as the greatest liar of all time. 12 jurors will now soon be asked to decide if the former US president and presumptive Republican nominee for November's election is guilty beyond reasonable doubt of falsifying business records. But Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, actually reminded jurors that Michael Cohen had been jailed for lying under oath, that he had acknowledged stealing from his former employer, and that he now lived with an axe to grind against Donald Trump. Donald Trump Jr., meanwhile, lashed out at Trump's friend turned foe, Michael Cohen. Listen in.
This is amazing. I think Todd Blanche summed it up best. If there was an MVP, if there was a GOAT of liars, it is Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen is the embodiment of reasonable doubt.
Meanwhile, a quick update on the Russia-Ukraine war for you. Ukraine and Belgium have struck a bilateral security agreement, including the delivery of 30 F-16 fighter jets, signed during a Brussels meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Belgian Prime Minister. Now, the Ukrainian authorities actually will receive the first supplies of the F-16 fighter jets very soon, but around half of its desperately needed foreign military aid is arriving late. This is what Kiev's defense minister has said. Meanwhile, Mr. Zelensky has said that if US President Joe Biden missed a peace summit organized by Kiev in Switzerland next month, Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, would applaud his absence. At a press conference in Brussels, Mr. Zelensky said he wanted the US president to be personally present at the peace summit in Switzerland, which is scheduled for next month, the 15th and 16th of June to be precise. Meanwhile, in an exclusive conversation with NDTV's Sonia Singh, veteran journalist and author Fareed Zakaria speaks on India's foreign policy in the last decade. He says that India can be a genuine intermediary in times of conflicts, as Western powers trust India more than they trust China by a long shot. Listen in.
What have you seen as an observer of the Modi government's foreign policy? What do you think have been its major successes? Also the fact that Yuval Harari, when he talked to me after the attack last year in October, made the point that India can speak to countries like Iran. We need countries like India which can speak to all the major players in this new geopolitical turbulence more than ever before. Do you agree with that view?
I do. I've always felt that it doesn't make any sense to isolate countries completely. I've been in favor of the United States talking to Iran. I've been in favor of the United States having negotiations with Russia. And the United States never objected to India buying Russian oil or buying Russian weapons. The United States has been very understanding of India's strategic concerns and realities. I think my own view is India needs to ask itself, does it really want to get 80 to 90% of its advanced weaponry from a country like Russia, which is a power in deep technological decline, in economic crisis, and that has been politically isolated by 65% of global GDP. That's an Indian choice, but the Americans have not in any way sanctioned India for those reasons. They have been very understanding. The issue is, again, not that India has this capacity and goodwill about it, but what does it do with it? So, for example, you point out it does have relations with Iran, which could be very useful. Mm-hmm. But has it used that capacity for anything above its narrow self-interest of simply importing oil from Iran? Has it used it to try to create a more stable, peaceful atmosphere in the Middle East? Has it tried to broker some kind of, negotiations or anything that could bring the temperature down. Now, the Chinese have played that role. I wonder why shouldn't India play that role? India would be, I think, better suited to do it because Western powers would trust India more than they trust China by a long shot. India could become a genuine intermediary. So I keep looking for India to use its position in a productive and constructive way that is in line with its interests, it's in line with its values, and that will then...
We have done that in Russia and Ukraine, where the Prime Minister spoke to both the President Putin and the President Zelensky, made the point to Russia that this is not a time for war. And of course, the G20 declaration where we got everyone to actually sign on that dotted line.
The G20 was an important achievement. I absolutely agree. I think nothing has been done to build on it. I think it really is time for us to get into negotiations with the Russians and Ukrainians because, this is a war that is helping nobody. It is killing tens of thousands of Russians and Ukrainians. Russia has been largely isolated, particularly, as I say, from the most advanced sectors of the world economy. The Ukrainian people are suffering massive hardship. So why not speed up that process? Why not try to offer a place, a platform, things like that? The G20 was a long time ago. The war has not, let's be honest, while that was a good symbolic effort, nothing has changed. The war continues. In fact, it's getting worse.
You're not betting on India's result, but what do you see on the Trump-Biden face-off? Who do you see as the winner of that November election?
Again, it's too, honestly, at this point, it's a little early to say, but only because, look, there are two things you can say for sure. Biden will win the national vote by millions of votes. He won it last time by, I think, 8 million votes. He'll win it probably by even more this time. But the way the American system is set up, and it's unique in the democratic world, that doesn't matter. What matters is these electoral college votes, which are based on a few states. And there, in those states, it's essentially a statistical tie. So, you're talking about in a country of 340 million people, probably 200,000 to 300,000 votes will make a difference one way or the other. So how to, figure that out? If you were to vote today, it looks very good for Trump. If the vote were held today, it looks good for Trump. But given how narrow the margins are, a lot can happen between now and November.
Let's get you visuals now from Africa. Indian Army Jawans defeated Chinese troops in a friendly game of tug-of-war that was organized during a UN peacekeeping mission in Sudan. Listen Indian and French soldiers were seen engaging in a friendly tug-of-war match in Meghalaya. This is during the 7th edition of the India-France joint military exercise Shakti that concluded at the Umroi Joint Training Node in Meghalaya. Now, this joint exercise actually came amid a strong push by both New Delhi and Paris to expand the overall scope of the India-France strategic partnership. And finally, Major Radhika Sen, an Indian lady peacekeeper, has made the country proud by earning the prestigious Military Gender Advocate Award. This award, announced by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, recognizes her outstanding service in the United Nations mission in Congo. Now, Major Radhika Sen is actually a resident of Himachal Pradesh. She has served as the commander of the Indian battalion in the eastern part of the Republic of Congo between March 2023 to April 2024. She was born in 1993 and she joined the Indian Army 8 years ago after completing her graduation in biotech engineering. It was while pursuing her master's degree at IIT Bombay that Radhika decided to join the Indian Army to serve her country.
Jai Hind, I'm Major Radhika and I was female engagement team commander of the Indian contingent of MONUSCO in the central sector of DRC. When we talk about a country like DRC, where more than 60% of the population is that of female and children. The role of female engagement team becomes even more important. We play a major role in getting to understand the threats that are faced by the citizens affected the most by this conflict-related violence. The main challenges that we face is winning the trust and the confidence of the locals so that they can come up freely to us with their problems. Through our constant interaction with the locals during the regular area domination patrols and frequent visits to the IDP camps, we have been able to ensure the people of their security and ultimately winning their hearts and minds.
These female soldiers are seen regularly moving around in our village. That makes us feel safe and secure.
Being a part of the FET is more than just a day-to-day mission, because we know when we go out, we are being looked upon by every member of the society. We know we are there to empower the weak. We know, we believe that we are there to bring a change.
Well, thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We will keep tracking the latest developments for you. You stay tuned.